This week's topic is actually it's kind of interesting because it's a question that surprised me. This is the first time I've ever gotten this question, and honestly, when I first got it, I wasn't sure how to answer it. So,
Ooh, I'm
um,
intrigued now.
this question is, how do I know if I'm bisexual?
Mm.
And of course, my instinct is to say, well, you just know. But is that true? I'm not sure that that's absolutely true.
Uh, I don't know that it's absolutely true either. I know it would be difficult to wrestle with because, in many cases, what's underlying and being said there is I may be bisexual, but I don't know if maybe my hesitation is because I've been socialized to be against it or to have some sort of either
Mhm.
bi or homophobia. Um, I might have these interests, but how do I know if it's a curiosity or a straight up orientation? I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that question. Um, and I think, again, part of the problem is people are so socialized, so trained, so conditioned to be like, hey, this is wrong. I mean, if you come from any sort of background or culture that has a habit of placing a lot of shame and guilt, just inherently on anything it considers wrong or quote unquote deviant, which is always an interesting word. Um, there are a lot of people that, grow and live up unto their, well into adulthood, resisting certain urges because they think they are somehow wrong or bad or whatnot. And then it's hard to know that if I'm still having those urges or desires or even thoughts, if my resistance to them is because it is not how I'm oriented, or is it because I've been trained to be resistant to these things? So
Mhm.
how do you know is hard. It's real. I mean, because ultimately there's only one person who can answer that question, and that's you. There are those that say try it out a couple of times and see what you think. But even then, you may try both, heterosexual, quote unquote, straight sex, or bisex or something else with both the same and different gender, and find yourself still not sure. Yes, it was
Mhm.
kind of fun, but I don't know. I felt funny afterwards. Um, there's a bunch of ways to break that down, and unfortunately, I think it's the type of question that can only be asked on or answered on an individual basis. What are the things that you do? What are you into? I'm not his biggest fan, but columnist and podcaster Dan Savage used to always say, "What kind of porn do you watch? What gets you off?" But even then, right? You know, I mean, I
I'm,
may be a
I'm a gay
deviant.
man and a lesbian anal slut, so.
Right. See what I'm saying? Yeah. I mean, it's sitting here like, what kind of porn do I watch? Well, I'm just fascinated by it as an art form, so I watch a bunch of shit. But I mean, what does that
Mhm.
say about my sexuality? Not much. It's just what I managed to pull up that day on the internet, but I'm a naturally curious person. I'll watch something I have absolutely no interest in. Well, not no interest in, but just to see what's going on, not because I want to do it myself. So it yeah, that's a hard one. That's a really kind of a hard one to break down. Yeah, fitness is saying there, yeah, knowing, quote unquote, is complicated by so
Mhm.
much of what is put on us. Uh, and that's where you know what? This is one of those areas where I get to make my plug for comprehensive sexual education. Because I think if people learn some actual truth as they're developing into their sexuality and growing into adults, these things will be easier to answer. You know,
Mhm.
some people never come out as bi or gay simply because there's just no support in their particular community for people coming out like that, or they don't know anybody like that. Some people are able to because they're able to find community, and it's easier to come out. It's easier to be whatever you are when you can find people with whom you are comfortable expressing yourself with. If you're in a community or something like that that doesn't have those resources, it becomes much easier to just sort of stay in the closet because I
Mhm.
don't know, I don't really want to have these conversations with people, particularly people who won't be supportive, right? So
Well,
yeah, I mean, identity and orientation are hard, especially when it comes to sexuality. That's the other thing because it can be in flux. It could really change. I know people that found out that they were bisexual after their heterosexual marriage ended. I know people that found out they
mhm.
were gay after their heterosexual marriage ended. I know people that were gay their whole lives and realized, wait a minute, I actually am bisexual. but I was resistant to it because the gay community was biphobic or whatever. So, a lot
Mhm.
of it has to do with the support and the environment that you're in. Um, and the only one that can really decide is you. How do you know? Not sure I can answer that question. I would recommend finding community and, if possible, therapy um, to help tease those out. But ultimately, those resources can only help you make your decision, not help like tell you how to go about doing it.
And Fitness says, I tried on so many labels in my sexual discovery. I'm still not sure if I found exactly where I sit, which I think is relatable.
Hmm.
The other challenge that I'd like to throw in here before I kind of answer it my own way is, how do we define it
Oh no,
simply? Um,
you may have to
is it
repeat that
sim-
sentence. We just lost your connection briefly.
okay?
Yeah.
How do we define bisexuality? Is it simply who we are willing to do dirty deeds with?
Mm,
Is it who we are willing to have relationships with or date? Or is it specifically, and this is an argument that's going on quite a bit in various circles, is it specifically the bi-gendered, I love men and women? Or does it actually cover the concept of pan, where any bits are good for me, I'm good to go, right?
right. Hmm.
And therein lies the challenges. So for me, I figured out I was bi when I had sex with a man after
Hmm.
being primarily with women for a long time. And then I was still primarily with women for a long time, but I'd have sex with men every once in a while.
Hmm.
And then once I actually, for lack of a better term, fell in love with a man, I have since then considered myself primarily heteroflexible in that I enjoy sexual encounters with all manner of creatures, but I tend to be hetero romantic thus
Hmm.
far in my life. So I think you know your bi, just, I mean, pretty much like you said, Zach, you know your bi when you know your bi,
Yeah.
right? Like when you feel like you can identify that way, then you know it. And when you change, you are something else. To me, labels are not brands or tattoos, they are underwear. That you
Yeah.
literally can change whenever
I
you
like that.
feel the need, whenever they don't
Yeah.
suit you anymore, whatever.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. I
just
like
like
that.
today, I'm happy and I'm productive. Tomorrow, I might be meh and
Right.
lazy. These are labels.
Yeah, kind of like a t-shirt. Today I'm a sex geek. Tomorrow I may be a radical revolutionary. I mean, I could be both underneath, but this is what I'm putting out there. We're talking about identity, and very much identity is individual. You determine your identity. It's just what you tell the world. You may be bisexual as hell and never tell anyone. I mean, you do whatever you want. You mentioned a thing there, Nookie, that I wanted to bring up, where it's another level of complexity, right? You can be bisexual and hetero-romantic. You can be bisexual and aromantic.
Mhm.
You can be, I don't know, heterosexual but homoromantic, whatever. There are so many iterations of the way that works. Ultimately, like you said, it's just a label that you kind of put on, and more importantly, it's then the label that you put on is the label you display, because that's what we're talking about here.
Right.
Because nobody cares. If you're an adult, you have the right to do whatever you want. I've seen a lot of kind of like what Fitness is talking about, the discussion. going back and forth between bi and pan, and is bi more inclusive? Some people argue that bi has always been inclusive. Some people say that bi is very binary and therefore it's
Hmm.
only males and only females. And I know bisexual people who are like, I date males and females, or I'm sexual with males and females. They're not so much the gender fluidity and whatnot. Some
Hmm.
people are like pan because they feel like pan is more exclusive, in that calling themselves bisexual is somehow um, an exclusive term because they are open to all genders. Some people will say pansexual because they don't care about your bits, they care about your brain, and the
Hmm.
bits will come along, or they love all bits, whatever, it doesn't really matter. So there's a bunch of levels of complexity to it. And again, like you said, are we talking about sexuality insofar as the dirty deeds, or who's that you form relationships with? What I
Hmm.
learned for myself is I always considered myself straight, or I used to say like mostly straight or 90 something percent straight or something like that. Not necessarily because I was clinging on to anything, but just because that was kind of how I identified. What I realized when I started having partners who identified as non-binary, however they presented, is that I realized I am both romantically and sexually attracted to people who identify that way. So that I can't
Hmm.
necessarily call myself completely straight. I kind of use the term somewhere between questioning or queer. I think, as I mentioned earlier, queer is a very much an umbrella term, and that's okay. You can be questioning, you can be queer, you can be somewhere in the middle and just, find out. Because for some people, they just find out every time they meet somebody new. Because if I, meet somebody who presents a certain way, but I like their energy, I like them as a person, I get to know them, we become attracted to each other, we fall for each other, we start a relationship, and the sex is phenomenal, but they are not either female or male, can I call myself straight? And it's kind of one of those things. Now, again, that's a decision that I made and just kind of went there with that. But you don't know. You may meet somebody tomorrow who totally blows away any label you've used so far. And
Hmm.
so, um, as far as the original questioner, whether or not you're bisexual, it's kind of up to you. And by the way, there's no wrong answer. That's the other thing I kind of tell people a lot, is that there's no wrong way to tell the truth about yourself. So you do
Right.
whatever works best for you. And ultimately the label that you use, like you say, that you put on for that day, whether it be a t-shirt or underwear or both, because by the way, you could have both the t-shirt and underwear. It could be multiple labels at once.
Hmm.
However you go about doing that, that's up to you, as long as you own that. I do recommend being honest with yourself, though, and with the people that you're in relationships with, just for the sake of trying to protect everybody involved. But only you can make those decisions.
Yeah, and Fitness says, I feel like we have to define all our labels now. It's just a part of conversation and new connections. So to me, it's we share those labels. And if we don't reject them outright and we create a connection, that's when we know it's time to start defining
Hmm.
and discussing our explanation, the way that we experience
Hmm.
words, the way that
Right.
we define them, and the way that the associations we have with them.
Hmm. Good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, as so often, we're in agreement in the sense that you'll know kind of when you know.
Hmm. Yeah.
But if yeah, I'll take this a step further and I'll say if you're concerned about knowing, then I would suggest doing some research and talking to people who identify that way and asking people, how do they experience that term and what does it mean to them, and see if any of that resonates with you. And then, take whatever step seems fitting.
Yep. I like it. I dig it.
Great. So we got another one in the can.